And so without any further ado, Latif, I'd like to call you to the stage. We're so excited to have you here with us today. Everyone, Latif.
Thank you so much.
The clicker.
This button. Thank you, Shane. I hope you're all adequately intoxicated for this talk. Yeah, I remember the DMZ. You guys always serve it up here. My name's Latif Nanji. I was the co-founder and CEO of a company called Roadmonk. Today, I wanted to call this presentation Connecting the Dots, and I've obviously been inspired by a very famous entrepreneur. And I look back, and over the last 6 months, as I've actually departed the company, I've had a chance to start writing about my journey and put together some of the pieces and learnings that I really hadn't articulated to other founders. And now that I spend a lot of time talking to them, I wanted to share some of the insights that I've learned throughout my days at Roadmonk. And so just to give you a little high-level sense of what Roadmonk was and where we were, Roadmonk was a company that solved how product managers use tools to get through their everyday feedback, prioritization, and road mapping. We were a startup like any other in the software space, and we only ever raised $2.5 million from VCs and angels throughout 10 years of operating the business. We got our money from customers. With that being said, it was a founder-controlled company all the way up until exit, and I will talk a little bit about the exit at the very end, because it's always the most dramatic and interesting. But we were also very honored to be on some high-growth lists. We were able to exit the business when we were at around 13 million ARR, and last year in November, when everything was just about to crumble, we got out at a very pleasant time. And so I'd like to start by actually talking about the foundation of a business, which is culture. And this one shocked me, but before I tell you the story that goes with this, just a show of hands, who's currently operating a startup right now? Okay, great. Anyone close to or above $1 million ARR? Okay, so about 15%. That's awesome. Now the last question. How many of you would say the spirit of your culture is like a family of the people that just put their hands up? Okay, and how many would say they're more of the spirit of a team? All right, about 50-50. Go team. One of the early things I instantiated in the business was a core value called Start with Empathy. It was a family-like core value, and I thought it was a great idea. But let me give a metaphor. So the metaphor is this, and it may not be perfect. You have a child, Jenny, and she's doing her homework, but one week she is not completing it very well, and she's running into issues, she's not cleaning her room, and as a family, you're thinking, I've got to support her, but, you know, it's just not working out. I think we need to fire Jenny. If this makes absolutely no sense to you, that's because it shouldn't. And that's because that particular feeling is a bit of feeling of betrayal. And so when we started our business and we were around 10 people, I remember I was going head to head with one particular individual, he and I. And all I could think was, I am going to make this person work. I am going to make them successful. And sometimes that works. But I realized the mentality I had was one of a protectionism, a high empathy and high loyalty culture. And there's nothing wrong with those values, especially when you're with your friends and your family. But there is a better metaphor, and I look to use sports analogies. The Raptors today were not the same team or the same players as they were 7 years ago for the most part. They are a completely new organization, and they are out to win a championship. They are mission-driven, and they have a set of values that dictate the way that they get there. Not every superstar is meant for that team. Cristiano Ronaldo is not meant for United. He is meant for another team right now. That is okay. And so when I look to invest in teams and founders, this is one of the first questions I ask. Are you operating as a team or of a family? because I want to know if you're going to learn to make the hard decisions and run your values through the organization that are going to make that team successful. And so what did I have to change as part of that? I had to figure out how to codify the behaviors I actually wanted, because we were a family-like spirit for the first few years, and we had to evolve out of that. So I did an activity. I took down all of the behaviors that I would observe during the week on a piece of paper, on my notes, and say, here is what I loved. I saw something from a particular individual, and I would write down those behaviors. And over time, I grouped those behaviors and codified them into core values. Now, that's really easy to do. You could write down a fun statement like customer first, but that's not the interesting part. It's the behaviors that you want to proliferate through the organization. And so this was the solution we used, plus the survey data from employees, to evolve those core values over time. This is a big pain in the ass. I remember when I started the company and we would have a successful interview, I was so excited for a new person to start because it would take months to find the right person. You'd go through all the interviews. And my co-founder, Thomas, was more experienced. He had had a longer tenure as a manager and CTO, and I was sort of the new kid on the block. And every time I got excited, he looked at me and he would say, just give him 6 months, see what happens. And I was like, oh, they're gonna be fun, they're gonna do great. And the reality is that worked about half the time. And I could not figure out what was broken in my hiring. I could not figure out why we would onboard a new employee that we would have an incredible conversation with, they would reference really well, and they were part of the team. And we had the right core values, and they matched that, and I thought to myself, something is not working. And so, oh, I guess I should get out of the way here, but. So I had to fix this problem, and after that, I changed the way we did hiring overall, but there was a few key things we did. The first was any person who walked into the door, whether you're a junior sales rep, a designer, engineer, or executive, there was an activity that was given to them where they had to do homework. And it was done on neutral ground. It had nothing to do with the company or the product. Otherwise, you have an unfair advantage in that conversation when you're negotiating with them. Bad idea. Two is we gave it to them in a generalized way. So what do I mean by that? When we give it to them in email, it was a bit open-ended. We did that because we wanted to have a dialogue with them and see how responsive they were, how they wrote emails, how they asked questions, before we got into a presentation and we had a chance to spar with that individual for a few hours, and we invited team members from other departments to get their feedback. This was the single most important thing we did when hiring in the early stages of the business. This last point is a really fun story that I'll tell you. So one of the biggest mistakes we made at Roadmonk was our technology. Our engineering and our technology stack was a nightmare. Our biggest customers like Visa would call us, and I was on a lot of calls about our software being very slow at scale. And so we had architectural challenges, and our board was heavily involved. And we had to go get a technical architect in 2020. I interviewed him. I thought he was great, but I didn't think he was that impressive from a cultural perspective. But he seemed like a nice guy, and he knew what he was talking about, but I'm not an engineer. I had my 2 top senior engineers interview him, and they came back to me and said, we don't think he's the right fit, we don't like his approach to scale, and we didn't really necessarily jive with his ideas. My COO walks in. He says, what are you doing? I said, we're interviewing the candidate. He goes, no, you're not. Students don't interview the teacher. And I thought to myself, well, that's a really simple concept. It wasn't that profound, but it felt like in the moment it was a hammer hitting me over the head. So what did we do? We brought in the VP of Platform from Ritual. We had 2 external CTOs from a company called Key CTO. And my friend Eric and them interviewed them, and they came back to us with the report. They gave him a test about how to scale Google Drive. They do that with all of the architects. They said this was the only candidate that got the furthest way through on all of the questions. If you do not hire him, we will right away. And that was a great lesson in making sure not just other people that feel like they're more senior, but people that have experience in that domain, that understand your business and your business needs, are part of that process and also give a test in the same fashion for that. And like many of you hiring executives, you're probably looking, maybe not even your first executive, but people that have areas of expertise in a domain that you may not come from. It is critical to make sure you bring other people in to help with that process. Starting with accountability. One lesson here that I take away from talking to other entrepreneurs when I was growing the business, and I asked them, hey, how do you do accountability? What's this OKR business? What's this EOS? I'm not a fan. I thought for a second, this is bogus stuff. And they just looked at me and says, if you don't start now, it's going to take you 3 years to figure this out. I said, 3 years? He goes, the first year you're going to fumble, you're going to have false starts, trying to get everybody on board. The second year you realize you don't have half the data or 3/4 of the data you need to even operate your business. And then by year 3, you start to get a smoothing out of the curve and understanding what's going on. This was one of our biggest Achilles heels. We let people just operate their teams independently. And when we didn't roll up our information to the board, they're like, you're just catching the wave of a market doing really well. This wasn't orchestrated. You have to understand the difference between hard work and luck right now, and you guys are getting a bit more lucky and catching the wave. But that's not going to last forever. And so this took us over, 3 years to get it. And we only started in 2018. So by the time we exited, we were just figuring this out, and I saw how long it took to get right. So the rules are here: start early and iterate as often as possible. Really speaking about connecting from the dots, the reason this chart is up, and I'm using team change as opposed to firing. Excuse the euphemism. Is that there's a curve that your companies are going to grow at a certain rate, and they're all going to go at a different clip. And one of the things that I recently came to realize is that everyone grows at a different pace. And you'll know that. You could just stack rank it in your head. Some people are actually growing faster above the curve, there's no line there, than your company's growing right now. And those are the people that come to you and they're like, I'm a little bit bored. I need some more responsibility. Give me more stuff to do. And you're like, oh, this person's going to leave and find a more engaging job. And it's not necessarily entirely your fault. Your company might not just be growing as fast. The faster your company grows, the more problems you have, the more ambitious people latch on. That's what VCs love to see, because they know that if you're growing fast, that you'll attract really high quality talent. Conversely, if you're growing fast and you notice that someone has been there for some period of time, they might ride the curve and then they might level off. And going back to the first slide, we had sometimes a family-like spirit, and I realized, wait a second, that person's been here since the early days. I feel like they should continue with us. But you know what? Sometimes the teams need to change in their structure and their formation, just like they do in a sports team, to get to the outcome. If you want to level up through the divisions in soccer, you are just going to need new players. And it's not that you can't thank the players before, but the new ones have to come in. And that was a really hard lesson. And one of the ways I evaluated that going forward was to look to say, hey, who's not growing as fast with this organization, and who might be suited for a maybe slower growing company that they may be more suitable in. All right. I'm going to read this one out loud because it is actually quite important, and I'm sure many of you have heard this quote before. The only thing that will wreck a company faster than the product CEO being highly engaged in the product is the product CEO disengaging from the product. Any product CEOs in the room? This is for you. Here we go. I made this mistake a few times. Hired a PM, and early days, my CTO said, hey, you're busy, go be a CEO, get someone to run the product. And I was like, but it's like, we're 8 people. Why on earth would I give it up already? Well, you've got a culture build, you got to hire, you got to fundraise, you got all these activities you need to take care of. How are you going to write product requirements? So I said, fine, we'll hire someone super senior. That way they can run the whole thing. Problem with that is that now if you have a 1% disagreement on vision, that is going to feel like a 99% sleep loss. And I have seen this time and time again when product CEOs give up the reins too early. And a lot of your employers will say, you're being overbearing, you're micromanaging. I tell them now to KFO. If anyone knows what that means, kindly fuck off. So there are ways to manage that. And so what we did going forward was we did 3 things. The first thing is complement, don't duplicate. If you are a product visionary type CEO and a strategist, hire just an execution product owner. Don't necessarily find someone who's a replica of yourself. We all say that, I wish there was just another version of me. No, don't do that. You just need someone to complement your skills so that they can augment you within the product development function. Maintain quality reviews, very straightforward. Have a weekly cycle where you see their work and you get engaged feedback, so there's a balance between what they're doing and having their independence while you have input to the channels that matter for you. And 3, integrate the triangle. That simply means between product engineering and design early days, you're generally not going to have super senior people. That means your job is to get in there and make sure that they're running smoothly, that you're helping with the disagreements, and that everything is running operationally well. Skip that slide, I didn't want to go there. It's an old deck, I updated it a few hours ago, as one would expect. So maybe this slide should say fundraising sucks. I'll tell you a story about a failed. We had 2 failed fundraisers, 1 failed exit, 2 successful raises, and 1 successful exit. So 50%, right down the middle. Let's talk about the failures because they're more interesting. We were going to go big in 2018 in terms of fundraising. We wanted to raise $15 million pre-money. I don't even remember. It's like 40, 45 million. And we got to the last 90 days of due diligence with a private equity company. And they were dicking us around. And we fought with them on terms. They didn't like some of the fact our customers were leaving us. And this dragged the company for 6 months. And through this period, something really miraculous happened. Our sales team and our customer success team took all of the monthly contracts and made them annual because we were running low on cash. And during this period, I think it was maybe 50-50, and we went to 80% annual. All of the cash started flowing into the business, and we became cash flow positive at that point. And on the 90th day post-term sheet being signed, we had a call. I was on with my executive coach, my banker, Mark McLeod at the time, if you know him, and the other person, who will not be named, and we had a full-on medium energy fight, which was pretty tense considering we're on the phone. I called Mark after. I said, we're walking. We have enough cash, and these guys are not the right partner to sit at the board. And he says, you're walking away from a lot of money. Are you willing to do this? This could change the course of your business. I said, we're going to do this ourselves. And we walked away and we did it ourselves. And it was a really big moment for the company. I came back and I told the leadership team, and I thought they were going to be like, oh, that sucks. We were so close. And they literally, their faces lit up. And I was like, why are you guys happy? And they're like, Latif, we can do this without venture funding. So, in a time of a recession, this may not apply to all companies, but the whole principle here is if you're raising $500,000 and you need maybe $750,000 or $1 million, that's not what this slide represents. It represents for the companies who are going out there and thinking, you know what, I need maybe $1 million, but I want to raise 4 or 5. The problem isn't with raising a little bit more money. It's when you get further down the valuation trap. And so all of a sudden, if you raise $1 million and your valuation's 5, well, if you had $1 million rough business, you need to grow $4 million over the course of 2 years in valuation. It's doable. That seems reasonable for startups. But if you have to grow, you raise $5, $6, or $7 million, now your post money is maybe between 30 to 35. And in the same 24 to 36 months or less, you're going to grow $30 million in valuation. That's where things get really complicated. And so going incrementally at a reasonable pace is how I think the best startups function before they see some version of a breakout growth path. All right, so 2 more of these and we'll go through this. One of the greatest blessings, kind of because of the failed fundraise, since we were going to give up board control and there would be an independent and we'd have 2 investors on the board and only 2 founders, is that we were lucky enough to maintain board control. And maintaining board control is one of the greatest things a founder can do to keep their sleep. And the reason is because the big issues that come at the board are not in the first 3 to 5 years of your business. You probably won't feel too many tense moments until you give up control to your VC, because your VC is not going to pressure you without the control. It just doesn't help them. They'll give you the feedback. But there will be moments, and we felt it, where they wanted to exert influence, and we maybe didn't agree necessarily on all the aspects of the exit, which is fine. There is always going to be that, and they were great partners and are great partners. However, if I didn't have control, I don't know if we would have gotten the outcome we did. And I don't know that I would have been able to sleep at night knowing that we may have had to push through in this current economy when valuations compress dramatically. Money isn't dried up, but it's just not being deployed at the same rate for exits at that time. And so this is a concept that can be done. And it can be done all the way to your Series F, and there's many founders out there have done it. And they simply do it by giving yourself more voting rights. You can let them on your board and be an observer. They can even have a board seat. Just make sure to set the voting rights to be a ratio of favorability to the founders versus the investors. And the great founders do this. They absolutely do, but it is something to consider pushing for. All right, let's talk about the exit. And by the way, you guys, we'll do a little quick Q&A, so I'll try to be as transparent as possible after that. There was 2 periods where, well, first I'll start with, I'm generally a pretty healthy person. I love to rock climb, scuba dive. I'm pretty active outside. And I try to take care of my mental well-being, meditation and such. When we went into lockdown, all founders went through a very difficult period. I, in fact, experienced for the first time an almost near anxiety attack where I had to go see a therapist because I had a ball in the size of a tennis ball in my chest. And while I don't share that story often, there was a good 12-week period where I had no concept of what was happening to me and how to overcome it. I thought I had all the wellness tools, but I still hadn't figured out how to overcome the pressure of having to go through 2 layoffs with our company, which was agonizing, worried about running out of cash, and our customers giving us a ton of grief because our technology wasn't where things were at, notwithstanding a leadership brawl. So it was all coming together at one point. The second time was the last 90 days of the exit, when you have a buyer who wants to retrade and change the price after you've gone through 70 or 80% of the work, knowing that they have you against the ropes, and all you can do is stand your ground. And towards those last 90 days, we were in a tough negotiation because we didn't pass a technology audit. Our October numbers were flatlined. And the market wasn't feeling so great. It was starting to come down a little bit. And we were like, time kills all deals. And I remember going from a little sleep to almost no sleep, waking up with adrenaline every morning at 5 a.m. And I remember our board member called for an update. It was October, so basically this month of last year, and he was in Vegas for a conference. Hey, Latif, what's the update? Everything good? We got the last like 2 or 3 weeks here. How's everything pushing? Within 2 minutes of the update, he goes, can you stop you for a second? I said, yeah. Because I'm having PTSD for my exit. Can you write this in an email? I need to go. This is too much to handle. It was that emotionally charged, what we were going through, that even my investor was like, I actually can't listen to this. It's so intense, and I actually need to go. Just to give you a sense. And I remember thinking to myself, I need to practice and keep myself active and keep my well-being and mental health in check because I am sprinting for the length of a marathon. And when you're doing that, the only thing that's going to ground you is your abilities, your body, and your mind. And so I encourage everyone, whatever methods you have, to double and triple down on that, because you do not want to skip a day while you go through this long, enduring race. And for a lot of the experienced founders in the room, they're probably like, hell yeah, we get that. And so thank you for listening to this story. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah, so I mean, I think the difference is that we recognize that our growth rate, like we could go to top tier VCs, and we talked to a few at the time. We had done sort of a whole checklist, but we found that with growth equity, which is sort of this middle tier category that we were in, I called it private equity as it's more familiar, is that they still wanted the same growth, but we found that the resources they had internally, like they had like a 50-person team, and that would help us with areas that we were not strong in. Whereas a VC fund is like, look, I'm making a bet on you plus another 9, and one of them is going to pay back the fund, and the rest of them I'll just have conversations. Where these growth equity is like, we kind of have to hit 8 or 9 out of 10, and so they're going to put the resources and time and enthusiasm behind that, and we kind of like that as a concept. Nowadays, I actually think VC is better for that because they're less in your business, and as long as you have board control, I think it's actually better. So we were pretty early days. I actually think the greatest resource, the staff was incredible, Abdullah was incredible, Shane was incredible, everyone was incredible here, because they always brought people to the table from the outside that we could like steal and be like, hey, there's an investor, and then we would just kind of like be able to attack those people and then have conversations. Because if you email them, you know, sometimes it would just be hard to get in touch with them. But also, like, it's the entrepreneurs. Like, a good friend of mine, Tyler from Inkbox, he just showed up here, right, to say what's up, but like, there's so many people that have graduated, and we have founder channels all over WhatsApp. And so when we run into problems and we grow together, we're able to tap into that entrepreneurial network, because at the similar stage you have similar problems and you want to be able to talk to those entrepreneurs. So that was really the most valuable thing, was the community that was brought together here. As long as it's handled and agreed upon, I always think that you'd want to get that out of the way pre-term sheet, because then the expectation is set right from the beginning, because that'll be a sticking point with the LPs and the fund, and that fund may not subscribe to that. I know funds like Andreessen Horowitz, they'll sign a $50 million check and won't take a board seat, because we're backing the entrepreneur, end of story. Some funds are like, well, you know, we're not a top tier fund and we don't care as much about our brand. They're going to be like, we need a little more control because we need to put our playbook in if things don't go well. And so kind of evaluating and understanding where your business is at in relation to which VCs you're talking to is a big point, which is why I said the word consideration. It's not always possible, but it's something I would try to push for if possible.
Would you suggest then creating that ahead of time before you fundraise? I mean,
absolutely, that's a great idea.
You know, if the founders come together and say, look, the founders of the company all get 10 to 1 to anybody else share class, I don't care what happens.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, even if you do that, it's you know, they'll be like, okay, if they don't accept it, they'll just ask you to undo it. So you might just be paying for paperwork at that point. So I would make sure it's just in the discussions in the term sheet. So if you do get a term sheet from them, it's like, hey, super clear, red line, our lawyer's saying like, we're not giving up board control. And you can also ask, if you get further down the process, like, hey, we're gonna issue a term sheet. Is there anything we should know? And it's like, hey, before you issue the term sheet, there is a couple of things you should know. We want to do a secondary. We are not giving up board control. Here's why. What are your thoughts? Before you run off and do a term sheet, and before we run off and tell our lawyers to make preferred shares, I would just have an upfront and honest discussion with them. So we hired a banker, or an advisor, I guess you could call it, and they take a fee for what they do. And so I'll share a little bit of the exit story. We had an inbound approach because when I had spoken to a lot of my relationships in industry, they weren't so gung-ho about some of our metrics, especially our churn metric, which was our Achilles heel in the business. And so when they came with an offer that we liked, the reason we brought in a banker is, one, having a third-party negotiator work out all of the things that you are unaware of is super important, because they have seen and done that process dozens of times. Two is that we wanted to see if there were other industry strategics that would compete for an offer. So he could go out to the network, put together a little pitch deck, put together a little executive summary, and shoot it out and see if we could get competing offers. And then third, they manage all of the due diligence, all of the waterfall, and they help coordinate with all the lawyers and accountants alongside of me, so they teach me how to run this process. Because going through an exit is not like going through a fundraise. A fundraise is it's like a walk in the park compared to an exit. An exit is highly complicated. There's so many moving pieces, and then they want to push on every element of your business without you realizing how much they're trying to squeeze. And so you really want to layer in between that with an advisor. And so we use a company called Samford Advisors, and they do the most number of deals in Canada. And so they're pretty well known, and the team are great. November 2020 was when we started the conversation. February 2021 is when they said they were interested in buying us. March 2021, they gave us a term sheet for an offer. April 2021, we took it out to market to shop it. May and June, I might be off by offset of a month, but this is roughly right. May and June, May was a bit negotiations around the term sheet. June and July, all due diligence. August was a month of retrading negotiations and stress and some disagreements. And then confirmatory, which is when they do technical due diligence and they do accounting due diligence, and there's third parties that come in. That's all of October and a part of November. And yeah, September, October, excuse me. And then November was the final legal grappling and battling and lots of enjoyment. Conversations I thoroughly enjoyed while I was on mezcal in Mexico City, and had a throwdown between the buyer and one of our investors, our passive investors, which was awesome. And then we closed. There's 3 reasons I sold. Number 1 is the market was moving faster than we were. So remember that slide of company and people? Well, imagine now company and market slide. And the market was moving. Our competitors were just frankly doing better than us. Credit to them, simple as that. We were not keeping up with them, and our technology was the reason for that. Our go-to-market team was awesome. So I felt we would have to raise a significant amount of money and execute better than them. And that's a pretty huge risk that at year 8, I wasn't necessarily into. Number 2, I do not like operating in a remote culture at a scale of 100 people. Or 120 people. When you're close to Dunbar's number, it is exhausting to have that many Zoom calls. And I did not know in 2020 when the world was going to convert back. 2 years is actually is a short amount of time, but it could have been 5 years. And so in my head, psychologically, I wasn't ready to just ride that out for an entirety. And the third one was personal reasons it's changed. I was getting into my late 30s, and quite frankly, I was like, I'd actually rather just be traveling the world and relaxing at this point, and I think I just need a break. And I generally had a ton of energy going into the startup. I was quite energetic, spending a lot of volume of hours, but I felt like I had sacrificed a lot of the not relationships, just the time with people that I wanted to spend with and loved ones. And so for me, in my head, I was like, you know what? I've kind of hit that point. And everyone hits it at some point in their life, and some people don't. But for me, it just kind of coalesced on that timeline. And so those are the 3 reasons I decided to sell.
All right, and thank you so much, Lateef. A huge round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.